Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Meaningful Communication Show. My name is Chad Eaves. I'm your host, and today I am joined by business consultant Michael Gansl out of New York City. And today we are going to talk about judgment. And Michael, can you share what inspired this conversation we're about to have in the article that you found?
Sure. I'm an information hog, and I get hundreds of emails every day and keep looking for material that basically helps me improve my consulting practice. And just a wide range of very interesting articles. And I happen to have literally, I guess, came up against this one, which was published in the Harvard Business Review in January, February of 2020. Now, I know, things get dated, but as I read this, I said, this is as current as it can get. And this is an article that was done by Sir Andrew Leikerman, and it talks about the elements of good judgment and how to improve your decision making. And since you and I have been talking over the last several months about books and things that make an impact on business and subjects that interest us, and then came up with this idea for the podcast, I said, this would be a perfect opportunity. So I sent you the article, you've read it, and so I thought today would be a great time to have a brief discussion and see if those people who are listening and viewing this want to tell us what they think.
I think that's a really good idea because judgment, and it's a cousin decision making. These are traits that always need sharpening, and even though they're worked on at some point, it's like any other muscle. If they're not used, there's not practiced, or even really investigated, because one of the things is we've probably all seen people who have made judgments that have turned out well, that was based on reason and some of the other elements that we're going to discuss here. And then we've seen some people that, they got lucky. And, that is an element of it, right or wrong. And it's something that we do every day. There's always the mantra, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover or judge by, this or that. It's part of the human experience.
Right.
And how do we do it better? I think is one of the things that both people in our personal lives and also in business, how do we get better at making judgments?
I think leaders are always, the quest is always figuring out how to make better judgments. So I thought the best way to maybe go through this podcast is first, let's describe what judgment is. We have a definition. Then let's talk about this survey that Leikerman basically, because that's what he did. He did a survey of quite a number of CEOs and leaders in business. We'll talk about the survey. Then let's talk about some examples where good judgment or bad judgment is required. And then talk about maybe how you can improve your judgment. I think that's be a good format for us.
Let's kick it off with the definition.
Okay. So Leikerman defines judgment as the ability to combine personal qualities with relevant knowledge and experience to form opinions and make decisions. It is the core of exemplary leadership, he says, and it is what enables a sound choice in the absence of clear-cut relevant data or an obvious path. So now that's the key, because the data, in order to make your decision, is not clear-cut. It's not obvious. So judgment is that ability to combine your personal qualities with your knowledge, and yet you don't have a complete data set or a clear-cut, obvious path, and yet you still have to make a judgment and inevitably a decision.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people struggle with today is everyone's used to having all the information, whether it's big data or whatever it may be. And, there's the concept of imperfect information or imperfect data. And it's making that decision, it's making that judgment like you talked about, Michael. And too many people that I've, encountered and worked with, if they don't have all the information, they just won't make a decision or they'll stop. And then bad things can come from that.
So that's actually, in my business, my partner and I, Voice of Reason Consulting, we have a tagline on our business card that says, we help business owners make decisions. And, it's interesting. We didn't say we help business owners make the right decisions. We say we help them make decisions. One of the issues in judgment and decisions is sort of getting paralyzed by wanting to make the right decision, but not having that clear-cut or obvious path or data to have the confidence that it's going to be a right decision. Could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really fascinating that then what we urge people to do is to make a decision and then inevitably deal with the consequences.
Right. And something out of my background in the Navy is, it's the mindset of, make a decision. Making a decision is better than no decision. You have to make some type of decision to take action, versus you're just sitting there doing nothing. And it's, like you said, it's sometimes just grinning and bearing it. It might be the worst, good decision or judgment that you can make in a situation.
Right.
And, it's interesting looking at these results from the survey that you mentioned. What stuck out to you in the survey that was done?
Well, there were several things that I thought that were. One is that as he talked to CEOs and leaders in responsible positions in quite a number of different industries, he basically said a number of things, but this one stuck out, is that good leaders who make good judgments can recognize their own emotions and biases and take them out of the equation. They're adept at expanding the array of choices under consideration. So that's really very interesting because, that goes to your own biases, your own opinions, your own emotions, and, making a decision, you may very well have to either include that in your decision, but also exclude it. And that's where it becomes an art, not necessarily a science, but an art. What are some of the other things that you saw in the survey as you read the article that impacted on you?
Well, I think it's that element of using a person's experience, but understanding when not to let that dominate a process, when not to let it dominate making a decision. I also think there's the organizational aspect to it as well. Is what's the expected judgment? What's the expected decision? And, what are the cases and how do you make that counterculture decision? A lot of people, we look at what's going on Twitter right now. There's a massive culture transformation happening there, a change in management styles. And, how do these impact how an organization, performs, after that? And the one thing I think that it does kind of stay with is there's lots of discussion about gathering information, about gathering perspectives, but it still comes down to the decision maker. And it's still that person's role to make the decision after he or she has collected all the different information and opinions around them.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because in conclusion of the survey, Leakerman basically says there are 6 basic components of good judgment: learning, trust, experience, detachment, options, and delivery. So, and I'm not quite sure what he meant with delivery. I'm assuming he meant the speed of making a decision. So
I think it could be the speed because his name is slipping me now. One of the previous presidents or CEOs of Intel, one of the things he was big on was speed of decision and keeping, an advantage in the marketplace. So I definitely think speed is an element, but also I think maybe it's making the courage of making a delivery or making a stand, of doing something like, Apple discontinued the iPod, or, when you stop, offering something to move on to something new or different. That could be very, a counterculture to an organization, and people, for the most part, are resistant to change. And how do you overcome that change and implement it as well? That comes from that judgment.
This does. So actually, now's a good time to kind of talk about some real world examples and scenarios where judgment comes into play. So I think you and I made a list. Well, why don't we kind of like go through some of these sort of examples and kind of say where judgment is really required. Want to start?
Sure. So one of the things that stuck in my mind was back when I was a starting out consultant with PricewaterhouseCoopers. We went through our orientation, and they bring up the scenario of, someone that you work with is getting ready to get laid off. You have access to that information, but then that person is going to be buying a house and closing on it. Do you tell that person? And it sparked some really lively discussion. And there's probably about 20 of us in the orientation group. And the correct answer, according to the corporation or the partner or the firm, was no, you don't tell them that information. But, I don't, that's the clear cut, easy answer. But what if you know that person, and, is that the right answer in every situation? It brings up, where does that line move as far as, what's your values? That's something that, we talked on earlier is, we don't make judgments in a vacuum. We have a set of values, whether or not we formally know it, or maybe it's just at the gut level or in the back of our minds. Is that something that's congruent with what we believe? And, and sometimes we have to make decisions that we don't like.
Sure.
But which way do you go in that particular situation?
Right. Now, you see, we're not going to give an answer to that because that answer depends on so many different factors. That answer depends on who else you're talking to, how much you respect that the person who's told you to say no. What's the culture and ethics of the organization you belong to? How deep is that relationship you have with your friend? How impactful a decision, if they're buying that house, will make on their lives? So it's not up to us to give the answer.
Right.
Although probably some people listening to this would say, "Yeah, give me the answer." Ain't going to happen, because there's no right or wrong answer. The question really is that person who were you in this situation making a judgment call based on any number of factors. And again, in particular, you didn't have really clear-cut relevant data or an obvious path. Oh. So another example might be, here's another one, which is real tough, I think, is you're hiring an employee and they have a very questionable background. And you found out about it through a third party. And this is very questionable, what they've done in the past. Now, remember, you found this out from a third party. And this is a person that you really want to hire because they fit all of your requirements. Interesting, right? How does one deal with that?
I think it could be a situation which, some of your own biases come into play, in the sense that, what are your values and what are your expectations? And I think it complicates it when you get it from a third party. Because that's already whittling away at that level of trust. One of the examples I've seen from this is actually when I was in the Navy and getting our top secret clearances, we had to go through interviews, and they would ask, did you have any arrests? Did you have any convictions? Blah, 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 blah. And there was a number of people in my group who had drug convictions, and a number of them were like, yeah, I had, possession or blah, 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 blah. The ones that lied about it, we never saw again. And, it's that, are you going to be upfront and own what you did wrong? Because if a person doesn't own what they're doing wrong, yes, you have to question, have they learned?
Well, we're not talking about the person. We're talking about you being in the position of hiring that person
Mm-hmm.
and deciding whether A, you would interview them at all, B, whether you could trust the third party that's giving you the information, C, have you done any investigation on your own to kind of decide, and then D, if you actually interview this person, can you find a way to ask them about the past and then first see what their response would be to give you an idea? And so again, some people will tell you, don't even bother. There's a level of drama here that you can do without. There are going to be lots of other people that will basically complete your checklist of candidates. And there are other people who say, look, it's your obligation to yourself in your own sense of ethics to have that interview, ask those questions, and then based on whatever data that's not obvious to make a decision. And maybe it's worthwhile giving people a second chance. Again, if you believe in giving people a second chance, so that's an interesting thing. I think
judgment, you get that X factor that comes in too. Whereas maybe someone's made that mistake, and if you can really earn loyalty by giving someone a second chance. And like I said, it depends on a lot of different factors.
Well, here's another one I think that you put down on the list, which what about retaining contact with somebody that you've worked with has been discharged from from your company, and you've worked, it's a colleague and you've worked with them for any length of time, and they've been discharged from your company, and your company tells you that you should not have any contact with that employee.
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of crossing some different boundaries, outside the office, someone that was there, someone, in one case I'm thinking of, the person was discharged for cause. And it wasn't stealing or anything like that. It was just more of a policy violation. And, it's, where does what is an organization's, I guess authority, end is part of the question. And then the second one is, it's kind of like, is that person worth keeping a network? Of course, is what the situations are. What's something, bad. But it's a difficult question I've seen people struggle with before. I know some of my clients have a policy where they will not comment about someone that worked there before.
Right.
They will give a referral. They'll acknowledge they worked there.
Well, that's
about it.
Right, but those are legal issues, and you work for a company and you're bound by certain agreements that you make with the company, and those are legal issues, particularly when there are companies where they cannot give any information about the person that's worked there. But I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about on a personal level. It's a judgment call, right? It's a judgment call whether you maintain the contact or not. It really is. It's a personal decision. And again, what we're talking about is nothing is clear cut. Is it your gut? Is it your own sense of ethics? That's why we have no answers. I mean, people who will listen to this are going to be disappointed because we're not giving them answers. We're just giving them more questions. And here's one more from another one that you made a list, but I'll take this one. And that is you have a client that is either slow paying you or not paying you. And now, what do you do? So again, coming back to judgment, so how do you make an appropriate judgment call here on dealing in a situation like that? And we all have that, right? Consultants, so on and so forth. We have that all the time, right? So again, It's a challenge. And again, there's no real answer. I mean, there are, but it's something you actually have to deal with. So.
And I think it's one of those, like, if you can identify situations that you kind of role play on how at least you would react to it to start with. Not necessarily that would answer it, because there can be so many different factors on why that situation happens.
Well, you just said something, Chad, that was very interesting. Role play, and I think that that's really that actually is very, very useful. So if you were to role play that situation with a partner or a trusted advisor, that would definitely help. So that actually leads us, because I think we're about 20 minutes in, and we worry about people's attention spans, including our own. And so I'd say here's some of the, and we could work this list. I'll take one, you take the other, and we'll go through that. So we have a list of how to improve one's judgment that actually came from this survey that Leakerman did in 2020. And so you take the first one.
So the first one is practice active listening. And I think there's a couple keys to this one. A, realizing that you need to listen, and B, slowing everything down, because we want, we kind of get into that habit of being really fast to respond and meet needs, where kind of roll it down, and maybe it's just, well, like, let's take a step back, or, I'll get back to you in 5 minutes or something. Just, slowing it down, and then sometimes getting ready to listen, that you're in a state to listen to the person actually, versus your mind's going somewhere else. You're not really paying attention. Because sometimes it could be the little nugget. It could be that little piece of information that someone says, not even realizing they're sharing it with you.
Good point.
And, that would be one.
So another one is to assess where your information comes from. So in the example that I had given earlier, where you would have questions about hiring someone, and somebody gives you some negative information about that person, it behooves you to really figure out, where's that information coming from? Why are they giving you that information? How did they get it? What kind of research can you do to basically find out whether you indeed have the appropriate data? How about the next one?
So next we got listen to other opinions different from yours. These, it's kind of related to that. Is what's the source, and what's the trust level?
Right, and then the next one is take the next one.
Same one. Seek advice from trusted sources. These are all three reliability, questions, really.
Right. I like the next one, which is realize that success does not necessarily reflect good judgment.
Yep. I think there's a lot of examples of someone that just got lucky and they weren't particularly good, but hey, it happens.
Right. And so don't make judgments out of habit. That's another one, right? Then that goes to, I guess, we say, well, the guy was very successful, let's hire him, or he's very successful, he knows really what he's doing, she knows what's up. But success, again, doesn't necessarily mean that those folks have made good judgment.
It's the resume conundrum, where someone has a really good resume of doing something in the past, but does that mean they're going to be good at doing the next function?
The most famous case of that, I think, was John Scully, who was the CEO of PepsiCo, and then got hired to Apple to run Apple, and he basically dramatically failed. But he had been very successful in one place, but not in another.
Right.
So this is an important one. Be clear about your own ethics.
Yeah, and we talked about that earlier, as far as understanding what your values are.
Right.
And having clarity on that, because if you're trying to figure out what you believe, especially if it's a high stress situation, you're already at a huge disadvantage. Understand what your values are and what lines you're flexible on and what lines you're not willing to cross.
Right. And then detach yourself both emotionally and intellectually. Now that's not an easy one, right?
No.
Detach yourself emotionally. I mean, if it's a critical decision to be made relative to your business, it's real tough to just detach yourself and be kind of like, stay back and don't make that decision emotionally. And then on the other hand, just don't make it just on the facts, ma'am, because it's not just the facts, ma'am. It's, that comes from Dragnet, remember that, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. I'm dating myself with Dragnet, but that's another story.
On Joe Friday, man.
Yeah,
great.
That's right. You remember that? It was great.
Oh yeah, and Colonel Potter that was like his first big TV show. I think he was his partner, and then the TV show.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. And so coming back, we have two more. I think this. You take the next two. The reflect and understand.
Well, I think the reflect is also related to what we were talking about earlier with the listening. Is it's slowing it down. It's slowing the roll, not shooting from the hip unless you're absolutely in a situation where that's necessary. But I think a really good example of this sometimes is on the show Mad Men is the Don Draper character, in the sense that he will slow down a response, or he'll like, well, let's think about this or something like that. And he does it in more of a cool way, but he's not responding instantly. If you watch some of those shows, it's actually an interesting study in someone that is uh, not being responsive for the sake of being responsive and
But
giving yourself time to think it through.
interesting. But contrast that with the next one.
Understanding when speed is required. That's when having the stuff in your back pocket is the advantage. Understanding what you believe, what you need, and really what's your competition. What are you making the decision against? What's governing that speed? Is it real? Because there's an awful lot of, oh, please fix this emails that go out at 9 p.m. at night for stuff that isn't that important, versus something that is critical to like an organization's survival, or fixing something that could be a real issue out in the marketplace. And it's using that judgment to, when you're going to ped the gas, when you ped the pedal to the metal, is understanding it is truly the case versus doing it when it doesn't matter.
So we've gone through a bunch, but the last one I think is something that is really interesting. And again, it's what Matt and I often focus on with our clients, and that is don't be paralyzed with concern for making the right decision instead of making a decision.
Right. I know when I work with people in the communications field, one of the top issues is taking that first step. They're afraid of sounding bad or not writing bad, looking bad on camera, whatever it might be. And they get so focused into that preparation phase that they don't make the decision and take that first step to go forward. And whether it's in communications or any other activity, you're not going to get anywhere if you take that, unless you take that first step. And in most cases, you can course correct, if it's something that needs to be adjusted.
It's true. So this was, what do you think, Chad? Was this a good conversation, a good topic to discuss?
Well, I think judgment, like we were talking about earlier, it's timeless because everybody's always learning. And, whether it's people coming up, that are more junior in the workforce, people that are starting their businesses for the first time, and instead of being able to rely on other people, then they find they're, making more of the decisions, and they could really benefit from a consultant or, a trusted third party. And it's just something that it's that muscle that you got to use. And, if you don't use it, you're not going to be confident in it, and you're more likely to get stuck in that analysis paralysis that we just talked about. So
we should probably finish the conversation just with repeating again the definition that we are using for judgment. And so judgment is the ability to combine personal qualities with relevant knowledge and experience to form opinions and make decisions. It is what enables a sound choice in the absence of clear-cut, relevant data or an obvious path. It is the challenge of life.
And it is there constantly.
All right.
Well, Michael, thank you for
this was a lot of fun.
Great podcast.
So what's next?
What's next? We'll be back in 2 weeks with another topic. And it'll be on the podcast Meaningful Communication show. It'll be on LinkedIn on my feed. It's also on Michael's YouTube page and a couple other places. You want to share where you can find it on your sites?
Sure. So it's on our YouTube page, Voice of Reason Consulting. It's on our website, www.voiceofreasonconsulting.com. And it'll be on my LinkedIn page, Michael Gansl. And, we'd love if you out there or you folks listen to it or view the podcast, send us some questions, send us some topics that you'd like us to discuss. And we're going to talk about books. We're going to talk about articles. We're going to talk about business in general. And it's going to be fun. Chad and I are having a real good time doing this, so we welcome to get some feedback from you all.
All right. Well, thank you again, Michael, and everybody. Take care, and thank you for listening.
Take care.